Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Boston, early September. The crisp autumn air drifted through the red brick buildings of a private school renowned for its academic excellence. In the perfectly clean and quiet hallways, every student seemed to follow an invisible code: respect, discipline, and prestige. Mrs. Whitney, a music teacher for over 15 years, walked these halls with an air of superiority that weighed on all who dared to meet her gaze. Her students feared her as much as they respected her, and few dared to stand up to her. But behind her apparent elegance lay a deep prejudice. She couldn't stand black students, whom she deemed unsuitable for her refined world. That day, a new student entered his class. Marcus Thompson, 17, had recently moved to Boston with his mother. His eyes sparkled with curiosity and determination, and a natural confidence emanated from his posture. Marcus wasn't just an ambitious teenager, he was the son of a famous jazz pianist, and music had been running through his veins since birth. As soon as he walked through the door of the music room, Mrs. Whitney noticed him. She frowned, irritated by his calm and confident manner. An idea immediately sprang into her mind: she was going to ridicule him. After all, what better way to publicly expose someone she believed to be inferior than through a musical performance? Little did she know that what she thought would be a simple moment of entertainment at her expense would turn into a bitter lesson in humility, for herself. Marcus Thompson walked through the large wooden doors of the private school with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Each step echoed on the glossy parquet floor of the entrance hall, as his eyes scanned the antique portraits hanging on the walls, witnesses to generations of privileged students. His mother, an elegant and discreet woman, accompanied him to music class. "Be yourself, Marcus, and never let anyone make you doubt your talent," she whispered before giving him a quick hug. Marcus nodded, feeling his heart pound. Mrs. Whitney was already there, standing behind the grand piano. She watched him enter with a cold, calculating smile. "Ah, you must be Marcus Thompson," she said, her voice meant to be cordial but laced with condescension. "I'm Mrs. Whitney, your music teacher." Marcus bowed politely. "Pleased to meet you, ma'am." The other students whispered among themselves, casting curious glances at the newcomer. Some seemed impressed, others skeptical. Marcus felt the weight of their eyes on him, but he didn't flinch. He had grown up with music as his guide, and he knew that no amount of arrogance or prejudice could extinguish his passion. Mrs. Whitney smirked at Marcus's natural confidence. In her mind, she had already planned what would happen next: a public performance that would show everyone where Marcus belonged. Little did she know, Marcus possessed a rare gift, capable of captivating and surprising even the most skeptical. As she pointed to the piano, Marcus felt a thrill of anticipation. Little did he know, this moment would mark the beginning of a confrontation that would transform the music room, and more importantly, change everyone's view of him and Mrs. Whitney. Mrs. Whitney stood in front of Marcus, arms crossed, a smirk on her lips. "All right, Marcus, since you're new, why don't you show us what you're made of?" she said, her voice barely betraying the pleasure she took in humiliating him. The other students immediately turned to Marcus, curious but also amused by what they thought was the new student's next failure. A few whispers circulated: "He's probably never played in front of a real audience." Or, "Let's see if he's up to it." Marcus approached the grand piano, his heart pounding, but without a hint of visible fear. He placed his hands on the keys, took a deep breath, and glanced briefly at Mrs. Whitney. Her smile froze slightly. She had wanted to provoke doubt, but Marcus remained still and focused, ready to rise to the challenge. "Begin, then," Mrs. Whitney called out, as if to challenge her competence. "Play something interesting." Marcus's fingers glided across the keys, gently at first, then with an intensity that immediately captured everyone's attention. The melody that rose was not simply a succession of notes, it was a story, an emotion, an inner force that filled the room and commanded respect. The students gaped. Some leaned forward, mesmerized, while others exchanged incredulous glances. Marcus wasn't playing to impress Mrs. Whitney or his classmates, he was playing for himself, for his passion, for the silent affirmation of his dignity. Mrs. Whitney felt a shiver of irritation run down her spine. She had hoped for a failure, a moment of embarrassment for Marcus, but every note he played instead underscored his own ridiculousness. She tried to mask her frustration with a mask of neutrality, but Marcus's intense gaze and the silent admiration of the class completely eluded her. At that moment, Mrs. Whitney began to realize that her attempt at humiliation was not going as planned. What she thought was a simple game of superiority would soon turn against her. Marcus took a deep breath, his hands placing themselves confidently on the keyboard. He knew this moment would decide not only his reputation, but also how Mrs. Whitney perceived him. Slowly, he began to play. The first notes were delicate, almost hesitant, but each key resonated with a clarity and emotion that immediately captivated the audience. The students' murmurs gradually died away, replaced by an attentive silence. Even Mrs. Whitney, who had planned to mock every false note, felt a strange tension rise within her. Then Marcus accelerated, stringing together complex and virtuoso passages. The melodies mingled, danced, and told a story of passion, struggle, and pride. Every note seemed to defy the teacher's prejudices, every chord a reminder that talent and dignity could not be ignored. Some students were amazed, others shocked. A few exchanged astonished glances. Marcus played better than most of the pianists they had seen in school recitals. The entire room seemed entranced by his performance, and even the assistant music teacher, who was watching, looked away, impressed in spite of himself. Mrs. Whitney felt her confidence waver. Her lips trembled slightly, and her smirk faded. She had wanted to reduce Marcus to a mere object of ridicule, but he had just turned humiliation into silent triumph. Every student could now see that his talent surpassed expectations and that his dignity could not be damaged. As the last note faded, a respectful hush fell over the room. Marcus's eyes shone with pride and calm, while Mrs. Whitney, for the first time, felt helpless. She had wanted to humiliate, but she was the one who had just been confronted with her own arrogance. That fateful moment marked a turning point. Marcus was no longer playing just to impress or defend himself, he had just shown that true greatness lies in talent, perseverance, and self-respect. And in that vibrant silence, every student understood that Mrs. Whitney would have to face the price of her wickedness. Marcus ended his piece with a final chord, clear and powerful. The silence that followed was almost tangible. The students stood motionless, some open-mouthed, others with eyes shining with admiration. Even those who had mocked him earlier couldn't hold back a murmur of respect. Mrs. Whitney felt her heart sink. What she had expected to be a public humiliation was turning into a triumph for Marcus. She tried to regain control. "Very interesting, Marcus," she said, her voice trembling slightly. But the ironic tone she had tried to impose failed to mask her frustration. One of the students shyly raised his hand. "Madam, that was incredible. Do you often play like that?" Mrs. Whitney felt embarrassment wash over her. She had hoped Marcus would stumble, that his fingers would tangle, that he would blush under the class's gaze. Instead, he had turned every note into a demonstration of mastery and confidence. The students began to applaud tentatively, then louder and louder. Marcus stood, bowed his head slightly in gratitude, and a small smile lit up his face. He didn't need words to show his dignity, his music had done that for him. Mrs. Whitney turned to the board, desperately searching for an excuse to divert attention. But it was too late. The students' gazes were now filled with admiration for Marcus and skepticism toward him. Her plan for domination had backfired. At that moment, Mrs. Whitney realized she had just opened the door to her own humiliation. Every murmur from the class, every clap, every admiring glance from her students was a stab to her ego. She had wanted to break a young man to feel superior, but she had just shown everyone that she was incapable of recognizing true talent when it was right in front of her. Marcus, calm and composed, gathered up his music and gracefully left the piano, leaving behind a distraught room and a distraught teacher. That day, the unspoken hierarchy of the classroom had been reversed. And Mrs. Whitney, who thought she had everything under control, had just realized that her arrogance would soon cost her far more than her pride. After the last chord, a murmur ran through the classroom. The students whispered to each other, exchanging glances of wonder and surprise. Marcus, standing by the piano, felt their silent admiration. For him, every note played had been a declaration: I am here, I deserve respect and dignity. Mrs. Whitney, meanwhile, stood frozen behind her desk. Her smirk was gone, replaced by a grimace of frustration and disbelief. She had planned to ridicule Marcus, but he had just turned her humiliation into a resounding triumph. Every student in the room now understood that Marcus's skin color had no bearing on his talent or worth. Marcus sat down again, calmly picking up his music. He knew this wasn't just music, but a silent act of resistance against racism and prejudice. He let every note speak for him, every chord convey his pride and dignity. One of the students, timidly, dared to break the silence. Marcus, that was incredible. You are really talented. Another added, with a genuine smile, you should perform in front of the whole school, not just in class. The students' recognition strengthened Marcus. For the first time in a long time, he felt a deep sense of belonging and pride. He wasn't just a new student, but a young man capable of showing the world, with calm and grace, that discrimination and prejudice could never stop him. Mrs. Whitney, watching the scene, felt her position waver. She had wanted to demonstrate her superiority, but Marcus had just turned every note into a mirror of his arrogance. Her students no longer regarded her with respect, but with skepticism. And in this room, the teacher's power was slowly eroding. Marcus, aware of the impact of his performance, stood up, inclined his head slightly toward the class, and whispered, "Thank you." This simple word, accompanied by his discreet smile, was enough to capture attention and make an impression. That day, Marcus's pride wasn't limited to his music. It was a symbol of his inner strength, his dignity in the face of arrogance and racism. And in the silence that followed his notes, Mrs. Whitney realized, for the first time, that her attempt at domination had just backfired on her. After the students' timid but sincere applause, Mrs. Whitney felt she had to intervene. She stood abruptly, adjusted her skirt, and forced a smile that didn't mask her anger. "Marcus," she said in a shaky but authoritative voice, "I suppose you really think you can impress everyone with that?" Marcus looked up at her calmly, his expression serene but determined. "Ma'am, I'm not trying to impress anyone. I simply play music as I feel it." The students leaned forward, attentive to the palpable tension between the teacher and the young pianist. Mrs. Whitney felt her authority waver. Every word she spoke to belittle him seemed to rebound on her, for the class clearly saw the contrast between her arrogance and Marcus's quiet control. One of the students dared to speak, "Madam, I think Marcus is right. His music, it's incredible." Mrs. Whitney frowned, her eyebrows turning red with frustration. She tried to raise her voice. "Quiet. I'm the teacher here, and I decide what's acceptable." But her once unquestioned authority had lost its weight. The students' admiring glances toward Marcus had become directed at him, not at her. Every gesture, every word to belittle him seemed futile. Marcus stood up slowly, without arrogance, and said calmly, "Madam, I respect your position as a teacher. But I cannot respect attempts to belittle me for reasons that have nothing to do with my music or me." The students' murmur of approval turned into awed silence. Mrs. Whitney, unable to respond, remained frozen. For the first time, her absolute control over the class was gone. She had wanted to humiliate Marcus, but she was the one who found herself exposed. This moment of confrontation marked a turning point. Marcus had just shown that he was not only a talented student, but a young man capable of standing up with dignity in the face of injustice and arrogance. And Mrs. Whitney, confronted with her failure, began to feel for the first time the sweet bitterness of regret. By the next day, word of Marcus's performance had already spread around the school. Students were talking about his virtuosity, and some impressed teachers were whispering among themselves about the young pianist's rare talent. Mrs. Whitney, who had planned to remain the undisputed master of the class, found herself at the center of a small, silent scandal. The school principal, informed by several teachers, summoned Mrs. Whitney to his office. Her features were firm, and her gaze revealed both seriousness and disappointment. Mrs. Whitney. I saw and heard about what happened yesterday. I must admit that the way you attempted to humiliate a student for personal reasons is unacceptable. Mrs. Whitney stood up abruptly, trying to defend her honor. Sir, it was only an assessment of his abilities, nothing personal. The principal shook his head. Your intentions don't matter. You've lost sight of the main point. Our mission is to encourage all our students to excel, regardless of their background or skin color. From that day on, Mrs. Whitney was temporarily removed from her music classes and assigned administrative duties while an internal committee reviewed her conduct. Her authority with the students had eroded, respect had given way to distrust and skepticism. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to receive praise, encouragement, and even invitations to recitals and music competitions. His performance not only impressed the class, it opened the eyes of many teachers to his talent and dignity. Mrs. Whitney found herself alone in her room, thinking back on her actions and how she had tried to demean a young man. Every memory of her attempted humiliation now seemed bitter and futile. She had wanted to dominate, but it was she who had been dominated by the evidence of her own arrogance. It was the beginning of a long reflection for her. Power based on contempt and discrimination could never last. And Marcus, without even knowing it, had been the instrument of her harshest and most humiliating lesson. A few days after the incident, the school held its traditional music recital. All students were invited, along with some parents and teachers. Marcus had been invited to play the opening act, a rare honor for a new student. As soon as he placed his hands on the piano, a murmur of admiration rippled through the audience. Each note resonated with a clarity and emotion that captivated everyone who listened. Students whispered to each other, "This is incredible, I've never heard anyone play like that." Even some teachers who had doubted him were speechless. Marcus didn't play to show off, he played to share his love of music and his pride. His performance quickly became a symbol of pure talent and dignity, inspiring admiration and respect. Mrs. Whitney, present in the room, felt her gaze fall on him, but this time, it wasn't to judge or ridicule him. She realized with bitterness that Marcus had earned something she could never take away, everyone's respect and sincere admiration. Her arrogance and prejudice had left her alone to face the truth. At the end of his piece, thunderous applause erupted. Marcus stood, bowed his head slightly, and smiled humbly. Every student and teacher present felt the impact of his music, and even those who had previously tried to judge him were forced to acknowledge his genius. Offers for scholarships, competitions, and recitals soon began pouring in. Marcus was no longer just a new student, he had become a respected and inspirational figure throughout the school. Black students felt encouraged and proud, while others began to question their own prejudices. That day, Marcus had not only conquered the music room, but he had also redefined the school's view of talent and dignity. And Mrs. Whitney, silent in the corner, understood that her attempt at domination had failed irreversibly. In the weeks that followed, Mrs. Whitney was confronted with the reality of her failure. Her colleagues and even some students now viewed her with distance and skepticism. Every attempt to regain her authority in the classroom seemed futile. Marcus, through his talent and dignity, had transformed the dynamic. It was no longer she who commanded respect, but he who inspired it. She often thought back to that precise day when she had tried to ridicule Marcus in front of the entire class. Every note the young pianist played reverberated through her mind like a humiliating echo. She had wanted to prove her superiority, but she had been exposed, not by words, but by music, a universal and implacable language. Even the parents of the students, who had attended the recitals and heard about the incident, murmured about his arrogance and inappropriate behavior. Mrs. Whitney felt for the first time a real professional and social isolation. Her apologies, though timidly addressed to a few colleagues and the principal, seemed hollow in the face of the admiration and respect Marcus had earned. Every morning, watching Marcus walk the halls with confidence and respect, Mrs. Whitney felt a mixture of shame and envy. He was young, talented, and admired, while she, despite her years of experience, was now judged and criticized. Her arrogance had given way to a bitterness she had never known. This regret was bitter, deep, and inevitable. She understood that true authority came not from humiliating others, but from inspiring recognition and respect. Marcus, without apparent effort, had taught her the hardest lesson of her career. That day, Mrs. Whitney realized that life had turned against her the humiliation she had sought to inflict. And for the first time, she wondered if she could ever regain the respect she had lost, or if she would forever be marked by Marcus's quiet superiority. As the months passed, Marcus continued to shine at school and beyond. His piano talent was now recognized not only by students and teachers, but also by prestigious conservatories and competitions. Each performance reminded everyone that talent and dignity depend neither on skin color nor social status. The school's black students, inspired by Marcus, began to believe in themselves more and dare to express their potential. Other students, who once might have shared Mrs. Whitney's prejudices, learned to look beyond appearances and admire the competence and courage they found. Marcus, humbled despite his success, continued to play with passion, each note a testament to his inner strength and resilience. He became a living symbol of dignity and perseverance. His story circulated among the students as an example that arrogance and racism never triumph in the face of true excellence. As for Mrs. Whitney, she never quite regained her same authority. The memory of her attempted humiliation and Marcus's resounding victory followed her everywhere. She understood that respect is earned through fairness, open-mindedness, and encouragement, not contempt and condescension. Her fall was slow but inevitable, and she had to learn to coexist with the success of the man she had sought to humiliate. Marcus's legacy extended far beyond his musical performances. He transformed a simple music classroom into a place where integrity, talent, and courage triumphed. He showed that even in the face of arrogance and hatred, dignity and determination could reverse power and leave an indelible mark. Thus, Marcus Thompson was not only a remarkable student, but an enduring symbol that true greatness is measured by talent, self-respect, and the ability to inspire others, rather than by fear or humiliation. And in every note he played, resonated a clear and eternal message: light always triumphs over darkness.